Glucose spike. Normally, the body's blood sugar level changes gradually. However, when a glucose spike occurs, the level skyrockets. Surveys show that in Japan alone, an estimated 14 million people or more have glucose spikes. This condition is being discovered even among people found to be healthy in ordinary medical examinations.
血糖値スパイクです。本当?
It even occurs in these slender young women.
血糖値スパイクでした。正直ちょっとショックを。
But not to worry. Studies have shown that we can ward off this frightening condition by making simple lifestyle changes.
どうや? Oh, 触ってる。
In this program, we'll bring you results of the latest research that will help you take care of your health. We'll also introduce a checklist test that will inform you of your risk of glucose spikes. Let's hit back at it right now and enjoy a longer, healthier life. Glucose spike is on the rise, regardless of age and gender. Can we identify who are the most vulnerable group of people? To find out, we'll conduct an experiment with the cooperation of 3 companies. These people all have normal blood sugar levels in a regular medical examination on an empty stomach. A glucose spike is known in medical terms as postprandial hyperglycemia. In other words, a very high blood sugar level after eating. In this survey, everyone will consume 2 rice balls and vegetable juice which contains fruit juice. We'll measure their blood sugar levels 1 hour after eating. When a person eats, it's normal for his or her blood sugar level to rise. But if it goes higher than 140, it's judged to be a glucose spike. Before eating, this woman in her 20s had a glucose level of 82. 1 hour after eating, it's 110. There's been no glucose spike.
ありがとうございます。よかったです。ありがとうございました。
This fit-looking man is in his 20s. Before eating, his glucose level was 97.
ちょっと要注意。
After eating, the level jumped to 233, much higher than the 140 benchmark.
スパイクです。
Then, many of the subjects were revealed to have glucose spikes one after another.
本当？嘘。
The tests are done using the latest blood glucose level measuring device.
で持ち上げて。これ針ついてますよこれ。マジっすかこれ。
While the measuring device is attached to this man's arm, changes in his blood sugar level can be constantly monitored. The man carries on with his normal activities as the device records a glucose spike without him noticing it. Here's a look at the normal changes in the glucose level for a healthy person. The level rises after eating, but not steeply. However, for this man, the level jumps past 140 after eating. It returns to a normal range after a few hours. The roller coaster changes in the glucose level occur repeatedly after eating. Why is this happening? Glucose contained in food that is eaten is absorbed into the bloodstream from the intestines. The blood glucose level is the amount of glucose or sugar in the blood. Normally, when the glucose level rises, insulin is released into the bloodstream from the pancreas. The role of insulin is to send glucose to muscle and other cells throughout the body. This action regulates the rise of the blood sugar level. However, in the case of people who experience glucose spikes, it's believed there are two causes. The first is a reduced ability to produce insulin. Because of that, glucose is not taken in sufficiently by cells, spiking the blood sugar level. The other is that even though the body produces enough insulin, some cells aren't efficient at absorbing glucose. In this case as well, glucose in the bloodstream builds up. Thus, for people with these irregular functions, glucose spikes occur after eating. Of the 65 people who showed no blood sugar level problems in medical examinations, a surprising 20 were found to have glucose spikes. Why is it difficult to detect this condition in regular medical examinations? It is because the blood sugar level is checked when the person has not eaten anything. Even for a person with glucose spike, on an empty stomach, the glucose level is kept within a normal range. This is why it's difficult to detect. In cooperation with Japan's Kyushu University, the town of Hisayama in southwestern Japan has spent many years to detect glucose spikes. The method they use is called a glucose tolerance test. At first, subjects consume a sweetened drink that contains a large amount of sugar. Then there's a 2-hour waiting period. The beeping is the signal to take a blood sample. The blood is analyzed to find out how much the glucose level has risen. These tests revealed some astonishing facts. Of the some 8,000 residents over 40 years of age in the town, more than 20% experienced glucose spikes.
Some would say this number of people who have glucose spikes is too high, but the town of Hisayama is doing this highly accurate glucose tolerance test on almost all residents, including healthy and non-healthy people. We believe it's revealing the actual situation.
If the same proportion of glucose spikes proves true for Japan as a whole, it would add up to more than 14 million people. This would mean about 1 Japanese in 4 over the age of 40 gets glucose spikes. Latest research has found that leaving glucose spike untreated can lead to serious illnesses. Hiroshi Moriyama is 43. He experienced sudden chest pains and had to be hospitalized immediately. This occurs in several places. This is a characteristic symptom of glucose spikes.
I was really surprised. I think this was the world's first time this was revealed.
Why do glucose spikes cause a high occurrence of hardening of the arteries? Recent research in Italy has unraveled this mystery. The cells of the interior wall of a blood vessel are used in an experiment. They are alternately soaked in a solution with a lot of glucose and in a solution with only a little to create the condition of glucose levels skyrocketing repeatedly. A scientist uses a special microscope to look at the samples. The blood vessel cells are glowing red. A potentially harmful substance called reactive oxygen is produced in large quantities. 2 weeks later, 42% of the cells have died because of the reactive oxygen. That's the cause of the high occurrence of hardening of the arteries. When glucose levels rise sharply, reactive oxygen is produced in large quantities in cells. This substance damages the cells. Then, when the cells try to repair themselves, immune cells are attached to the artery walls and are absorbed into them. The artery walls swell and become narrow in those places. That's how the arteries become hardened. The latest technology provides video footage that captures this process. This is the inner lining of the arteries of mice that are subject to glucose spikes. Let's enlarge the inner wall. Black spots are concentrated in the damaged lining. They are immune cells that have attached to the artery. Whenever we have a glucose spike, the hardening of our arteries occurs little by little.
A glucose spike is not a precursor of diabetes. A glucose spike itself can be called a disease. It damages the heart. It damages the blood vessels. It is causing cardiovascular disease.
Other research has shown that people who have glucose spikes have a 1.9 times greater risk of suffering a heart attack or a stroke because of hardening of the arteries. And that's not all. People experiencing glucose spikes are 1.6 times more likely to have Alzheimer's-type cognitive impairment. The key culprit is amyloid beta protein, a waste deposit that builds up in the brain and is considered to be behind Alzheimer's. People susceptible to glucose spikes often have diminished cell capacity to absorb glucose. When that happens, the pancreas releases large amounts of insulin to decrease the amount of sugar in the bloodstream. When it's transported to the brain, this insulin becomes troublesome. Moreover, when a glucose spike occurs, cells generate great amounts of reactive oxygen. This reactive oxygen damages DNA within cells in the body, creating a 1.5 times greater risk of cancer. Glucose spikes really are the source of serious illnesses. How can we detect glucose spikes as early as possible? In the town of Hisayama, researchers have been analyzing what type of people are susceptible to glucose spikes. 50 years of study has finally led to a conclusion. Based on the results of this analysis, we've developed a checklist test so people can know whether they are at risk of glucose spikes. Here, we introduce this simple test, which is based on data from studies of Japanese people. There are 8 questions in all. Please add up all your points. The higher your overall points, the greater the likelihood of glucose spikes. The first question is your gender. Men get 4 points and women 0. Men are much more likely to have glucose spikes. Next, your age. People 45 to 54 years old have the highest risk. Next, are any of your parents or siblings diabetic? The genetic component has a close relationship. Next, how's your waistline? Obese people with a lot of visceral fat have a high risk of glucose spikes. An important checkpoint is the body mass index, BMI, which measures obesity. It's calculated based on a person's height and weight. For example, if you weigh 60 kilograms and are 170 centimeters tall, your BMI is 20.76. The higher the BMI, the greater the risk of glucose spikes. The next question is about high blood pressure, which increases the likelihood of glucose spikes. People who smoke a lot are also at greater risk. Finally, people who make a conscious effort to exercise at least 3 times a week have a lowered risk of glucose spikes. If your total score is 9 points or less, you have a low risk of glucose spikes. If your score is 10 to 19, you should be careful. Think about improving your daily habits. People with scores of 20 and above really should get their glucose levels carefully checked at a hospital or clinic. The important factor is having awareness of your risks of glucose spikes as quickly as possible. It would be a great mistake to believe that glucose spikes are a problem only for obese people who are middle-aged and older. Studies show that unexpected cohorts are also at risk of this condition. These slender young women in their 20s were invited to a research room at Juntindo University. They're taking a glucose tolerance test to check for glucose spikes.
結構そんなに太ってはないので、大丈夫かなって。
人と比べて痩せている方だと思いますし、また若いからまだそんな心配はしたことがないです。
What was the result of their tests?
いわゆる血糖値スパイクと言われる食後の高血糖でした。はい。ですね。
2 hours after consuming the sweetened drink, this woman's glucose level was 156, beyond the normal range of 140.
正直ちょっとショックを受けてます。
What about this woman?
90分値188、120分値190といったいわゆる血糖値スパイクは食後の高血糖を示しております。はい。
いやーちょっともっと体をしっかり考えないとなと思いました。
なんかしない検査だと思うので、
しといてよかったです。でも
The researchers have found that 24% of slender women in their 20s have glucose spikes. But why? The cause is related to the amount of muscle mass they have. Muscle cells absorb a great deal of sugar in the bloodstream. But excessive dieting or lack of exercise greatly decreases muscle mass. With nowhere to go, the glucose builds up in the bloodstream, making glucose spikes easier to occur.
The common wisdom is that being slender is healthy, but becoming too thin might cause new illnesses, which is already being seen in some diseases. I believe that we need to carefully rethink the dangers that go along with being too thin, including glucose spikes.
The risk comes not only from losing muscle mass. Glucose spikes can readily occur because of a certain lifestyle habit that a number of people have these days. Eve Van Coulter of the University of Chicago proved this through an experiment.
So I'm going to show you the room. And it is in a bed like this that the participants were sleeping and also were tested. And with these cameras, we can monitor each subject in each room day and night.
This is the test Van Coulter carried out. They developed glucose spikes.
We were surprised that the effect was large because it actually translated to the development of a pre-diabetic state in these young, healthy, lean participants after just 1 week.
Why does a lack of sleep cause glucose spikes? When humans become sleepy, the brain orders the secretion of melatonin, a hormone. When this melatonin works on the pancreas, it secretes more insulin. The melatonin also works on muscles to help them absorb sugar from the bloodstream. However, since there is a loss of melatonin with the lack of sleep, the secretion of insulin decreases, thereby diminishing the absorption of glucose by muscles, resulting in a sharp rise in glucose levels.
You know, sleeping the right amount of time and having regular bedtimes are as important as exercise and good diet.
Even young people are susceptible to glucose spikes because of their lifestyle habits. And the latest research shows that this danger could even affect children. Researchers in Japan have carried out detailed blood testing of more than 8,000 fourth-year students in all elementary schools in Kagawa Prefecture for the past 2 years. The researchers are focusing on children's glucose levels. They found that their average glucose levels are rising steadily. This is before the onset of glucose spikes. The results have shown that 14.5% of fourth-year male students and 13.6% of female students have elevated glucose levels just within the normal range. If ignored, these children run the high risk of developing glucose spikes and other abnormalities within a few years.
大人のぽっちゃりした人の病気だと思ってたので
心配ですね。食生活も変わってきたのでそういうのも考えられるのかなと。
Spikes in glucose levels are a risk to health that all generations have to be on guard against. So, given we know glucose spikes can lead to serious illnesses, what can we do about it? The latest research has shown that if we make efforts to prevent our glucose levels from rising, we can reduce the risk of glucose spikes and safeguard our health. This next test shows how that's possible. Researchers compared two mice. One is healthy, the other has a high glucose level. First, let's look at the pancreatic cells from the healthy mouse. The brightly shining spots are insulin. It's clear that insulin is being fully secreted from the cells. Next, let's observe cells from the high glucose mouse. Insulin is hardly being secreted. The pancreatic cells are quite weak. For the next 2 months, researchers administer a drug to the affected mouse to make its glucose level fall temporarily. Now, let's look at the pancreatic cells 2 months later. The insulin is being amply secreted from the once weak pancreas. This shows the difference compared with the time when the mouse's glucose level was high. With the temporary curbing, the cells of the weakened pancreas recovered to a near healthy state.
If glucose levels are lowered through an improvement in lifestyle habits, the secretion of insulin can be recovered. A healthy condition can be restored.
It's the same for humans. If afflicted people make an effort to prevent the spikes, their weakened pancreatic cells can recover, and they can return to a healthy state with a decreased likelihood of glucose spikes. But what can we do to prevent sharp rises in glucose levels after eating? Through the experiment we conducted earlier, Yoichiro Haruta found out that he was experiencing glucose spikes. The 27-year-old agreed to take certain measures to eliminate them. Haruta says he's trying out a new way of eating. Let's take a look at his dinner. This is his choice from the menu. Stir-fried beef with bean sprouts, fried chicken, and then raw fish. He also has a full bowl of rice.
いや結構量ありましたね。思った以上にありました。お腹いっぱいです。大満足です。はい。やべえなこれすげえ緊張する。
Now, how is his worrisome glucose level? In his previous check, the level rose to 233 1 hour after eating. How is it this time? Amazing! It's 123, lower than the limit of 140. There was no glucose spike. What did Haruta do exactly? He used measures developed by Kansai Electric Power Medical Research Institute, which carried out this experiment.
It's an experiment investigating what order of eating various foods can curb glucose spikes.
It's said that eating vegetables before rice will prevent sugar levels from rising. When we eat vegetables, the dietary fiber in them covers the surface of our intestines like a wall. The intestines then gradually absorb the glucose taken in later. In fact, besides vegetables, there are other foods that, if consumed before rice, will inhibit glucose spikes. The experiment investigated how long it takes for rice to make its way to the intestines. Researchers checked what happens when rice is eaten first. It took about 30 minutes for half the amount of rice to reach the intestines. However, when another food is eaten before rice, that time lengthens to 80 minutes, nearly 3 times longer. When rice takes more time to reach the intestines, the absorption of glucose also takes longer. This restrains the sudden rise of glucose levels. Then, what was that other food?
Steak.
The point is that meat includes lipids and proteins. When these are sent to the intestines, a hormone called incretin is secreted from the intestines. As that happens, the movement in the stomach and intestines slows down. When rice is eaten after that, the absorption of glucose is more gradual. Moreover, this incretin also does good things for the pancreas. These are pancreatic cells, which secrete insulin. When incretin is present, the cells actively release insulin. Even when the pancreatic cells are weak and can only release a limited amount of insulin, incretin can control the rise of blood sugar. That being the case, a recommended order for eating to suppress glucose spikes is first to eat vegetables. Then meat or fish, which contain lipids and proteins. Finally, carbohydrate-rich foods, such as rice or bread. Besides the eating order, there is another important way to prevent glucose spikes. This is the result of an experiment that demonstrates it. When people eat 3 meals regularly every day, changes in glucose levels are steady. However, if they skip breakfast, the blood sugar level spikes sharply after they eat lunch. Moreover, if people miss both breakfast and lunch, there is an even greater spike after dinner is eaten. The longer the fasting period, the easier it is for glucose spikes to occur after a meal is finally eaten. Therefore, people who want to eliminate blood sugar spikes must be careful not to skip meals. But what about the types of things we eat? A hot topic now that has raised concern is the low carbohydrate diet some people rely on to reduce their weight. In the United States, research is continuing on low-carb diets as a way to prevent sharp rises in blood sugar.
And you're going to see how that consists of cauliflower puree, which is known to be an excellent alternative to mashed potatoes, equally delicious by weight-lowering carb.
At this university, obese people with elevated glucose levels are given guidance on how to manage proper low-carb diets. What does that actually mean, a proper low-carb diet? We looked into what the participants are eating for dinner. The paper shows the appropriate carbohydrate-restricted diet decided in consultation with this man's physician. The carbohydrate restriction varies according to the blood sugar level and health of each individual. This man has a non-severe form of diabetes. He gets pork and sautéed spinach with carbohydrate-rich gnocchi. Calories from carbohydrates are kept at 50% of the meal's total calories. On the other hand, how about the meal for this woman who has severe diabetes? She gets only pork and vegetables and no carbohydrate-rich foods. The calories from carbohydrates for the entire meal have been restricted to just 10%. Carbohydrates are sharply reduced for people with serious forms of diabetes, but they are never completely eliminated. Another important thing is to reduce carbohydrates reasonably so that the joy of eating is not diminished. This woman has been on a low-carb diet for 5 years now. She showed us her cooking tricks for restricting carbs.
Pepper, cheese.
Today, her main dish is vegetable gratin. She adds a full amount of cheese. Although the dish has calories, it's low in carbohydrates. Now she's slicing zucchini into long strips. She adds them to soup as a substitute for pasta noodles. This looks like fried rice, but she doesn't use rice. She's chopped cauliflower so that it looks like rice grains.
The way I have approached low carb is to find my favorite meal, something I want, and adapt it to low carb.
These people are on low carbohydrate diets that a specialist oversees in accordance with each individual's level of blood sugar, degree of obesity, and health.
And what's being seen in the research and also clinically is that people are able to control their blood sugar better with this diet than their previous diets, and they're also able to cut back on their medications. So typically when I think of tailored, I think of choosing foods that a person enjoys and trying to help them explore foods that are acceptable to the diet that they enjoy.
Opting for low-carb meals is effective for eliminating glucose spikes. However, there are risks when people reduce their carbohydrate intake excessively because of uninformed judgment. We should go about it correctly and reasonably after consulting with a doctor and a nutritionist. Exercise is, of course, important for putting a lid on glucose spikes. Recent research has shown that exercise is effective, even without doing something very demanding. If people having sharp glucose spikes do not move after eating, their blood sugar levels will not fall but remain abnormally high. However, if they just take a walk soon after eating, the blood sugar level falls quickly to within the normal range. Why? Normally, for around 15 minutes after eating, blood collects in the stomach and intestines to facilitate the digestion and absorption of food. However, if people move during this period, the blood gets diverted to the hands and legs, slowing down the activity of the stomach and intestines. As a result, the absorption of sugar is delayed, holding down the rise of the glucose level. In other words, the key point is to move your body soon after eating. But what if we are busy and have little time for a leisurely stroll? This gaming company, which participated in our experiment, came up with an idea. 1/3 of their employees were found to have glucose spikes. Everyone spends practically the whole day sitting at their computers. Their office occupies only one floor. How can they possibly exercise here? Their idea was to make one of the two entrances to the office a no-go zone. By doing so, when employees go to the bathroom or kitchenette, they have to walk more than twice the distance. In fact, they calculated that the amount of movement for those employees who rarely get up from their desks increased by 30%. Meanwhile, this consulting company has also come up with a unique strategy. It's 1 p.m., just after lunch. The employees have gathered for a meeting. But everyone remains standing. Moreover, look at their feet. They're all doing foot scrunches. They had the bright idea of trying to stretch and move their bodies while having the meeting. Even during the busy work week, they try to move about constantly after lunch. Just by making these small efforts to alter daily habits, they're able to bring down spikes in their blood sugar. It's more evidence that everyone can make small adjustments to their lifestyles in an effort to eliminate glucose spikes and their harmful side effects. Overlooked until now as a real threat, glucose spikes are the source of many serious illnesses. Modern science has finally caught up with this demon that causes heart attacks, cancer, diabetes, and even dementia. But this threat can be warded off by some simple changes to our daily lifestyle. It is us who hold the key in our hands right now to significantly lengthen our healthy lives.